Does it seem odd to you that we live in a world where project managers who oversee billions in construction, infrastructure, tech, and healthcare projects operate without mandatory licensing or regulation? Does it seem strange that we are basically still a trade and not an approved profession? The definition of a profession taken from Professions Australia in 1997 states it is a disciplined group of individuals who adhere to high ethical standards and uphold themselves to and are accepted by the public as possessing special knowledge and skills in a widely recognised, organised body of learning derived from education and training at a high level, and who are prepared to exercise this knowledge and these skills in the interests of others. Inherent in this definition is the concept that the responsibility for the welfare, health, and safety of the community shall take precedence over other considerations. I mean, stand back for a moment and compare it to the legal, medical, or tax and accounting professions, or even financial advisors. In Australia, they are governed by legislation, a regulatory board, commissions, industry bodies, and ethical standards, who ensure their professionals are educated and licensed in order to perform in the field to safeguard patients, consumers, and investors. So why isn't project management a recognised profession, and should it be? Are we ready to regulate the game? Is there a need? Join us on this episode as we discuss the research and limitations to uncover the truth behind this global gap and what it could mean for the future of projects. At Powering Projects, we champion the growth of project people, empowering every subscriber to lead with distinction, drive impactful outcomes, and turn vision into victory. Through sharp insights, inspiring stories, and energetic conversations, we will celebrate the exceptional people who transform industries and build a better world. Welcome to the Powering Projects podcast, where we explore the strategies, stories, and insights that make projects thrive. I'm your host, DK, and today we're diving into a topic that has fascinated me for years. Why is project management still a trade and not a profession? Is project management ready to be a profession? And is there a need? Join us on this episode as we discuss the research and limitations to uncover the truth behind this global gap and what it could mean for the future of projects. But before we kick off, if you want to join a community that puts your career first, gain global connections, cutting-edge skills, and hear from voices just like yours who are shaping the project management industry, hit the like button and subscribe to the podcast now. So the problem statement for today. Project management, despite its critical role in delivering complex, costly, and high-value projects across industries and the globe, is not a registered profession globally or in Australia. The industry fundamentally lacks compulsory and mandatory licensing, standardised qualifications for entry to practice, and a centralized regulator, which may stem from project management's interdisciplinary nature. For the project management industry, there is no requirement for high-level training prior to experience in the field, nor any mandate or incentive to achieve a level of certification or maintain professional development. Unlike the law, medical, tax, accounting, and financial advisory professions, the project management industry has no legislation to mandate how it operates, no regulatory bodies to protect investors, the community, businesses, and consumers, and no commission to monitor compliance on behalf of government. Further, with the global rise in the project economy, more resources are being drawn into the field as accidental PMs without prior training, or as converts from engineering disciplines, and have subsequently become heavily reliant on voluntary training and certification models like those offered by the Australian Institute of Project Management, the Project Management Institute, and the International Project Management Association. So, is there a need or an appetite to professionalise project management in Australia and beyond? Is regulation a worthwhile pursuit for the industry, investors, constituents, and society more broadly? And if so, why has progress stalled? Today, we are joined by two esteemed and learned professionals from the project management industry across both academia and business to discuss the barriers to professionalisation and why. Please let me introduce Dr. Chivonne Algeo, former Associate Professor at Monash Business School and Vice President of the Academic Board, and today the MD of Value Oriented People and co founder at Good Energy Minds, and also Mr. Campbell Johnston, a prominent business leader in Victoria.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much, Daniela. Good to be on the podcast.
Dr. Chivonne Algeo is a distinguished leader with over 20 years of experience in project management across corporate, not for profit, and academic sectors in Australia and internationally. Her expertise lies in aligning strategic opportunities with organisational vision to deliver innovative outcomes through people focused approaches. She holds a PhD and a Master's in Project Management from the University of Technology, Sydney, with research centred on knowledge acquisition, environmental influences, and behavioural impacts on project delivery. Her work, cited in 206 publications, has significantly influenced project management education and practice. Campbell Johnston is a highly strategic and transformational senior executive, motivated by invigorating business performance to achieve commercial success within the financial and professional services sectors across Australia, the UK, South Africa, and Asia. His experience spans general management with substantial offshore operations, sales, business turnaround, and change management capability. He has a depth of technical knowledge across a broad range of operational contexts and technology platforms, including offshore development, sales management, and business management in Asian, New Zealand, and South African markets. And with no further ado, let's jump in. So, our first question is going to Dr. Algeo. Your 2008 paper argued that project management lacks the fiduciary responsibility and the collective discipline of a profession, unlike fields like medicine, law, or accounting. Has the field progressed towards professional status since then?
I would have to say, sadly, very limited progress in the professionalisation or recognised professionalisation of project management. And I can look at a couple of examples. One in the UK, it was in 2017 that the APM, the Association for Project Management, was recognised as a chartered body by the government, and that was then bestowed on them as a royal charter. That was mentioned in the paper, but that didn't actually happen until 2017. So the award that the APM provides their members as individuals, and I'll stress the word individuals, it's not necessarily the project management field. I'm not going to call it a profession because that's a personal opinion. They can be recognised as chartered project professionals, their accreditation within that body. It does carry significant weight, though, from a legal perspective and also professionally. So if we look at how the protection of members of various bodies, it is up to those individual bodies. It's not universal. And I'll keep coming back to that universal application of being recognised as a profession. If we're looking at close to home, in Queensland in 2018, there was a regulation, it's called the Queensland Building and Construction Commission Regulation, and that's recognising, again, individuals who are working on projects over the value of 3,300 Australian dollars. So that's not a huge amount of money when we're talking about project management areas, but they must hold a accreditation or license called Builder Project Management Services. So that type of license gives the individual, again, the ability to work on government projects in Queensland. And they have to meet a certain number of eligibility requirements, and that's around technical qualifications. They have to also demonstrate 2 to 5 years experience and a qualification, depending on what type of qualification they're working towards. And they've got to be a fit, proper person and demonstrate professional indemnity insurance to be admitted as this recognised, eligible RPEQ qualified profession. So, as an individual, they're the two more close to home examples, and there are various frameworks within the Queensland Government. There's the Transport and Main Roads on-queue framework, and that's a methodology that those projects managed within that department in the government, in the Queensland Government, apply. Again, it's within the department, it's not universally applied. There's also an enterprise architecture that the Queensland dictates, the P3M3 maturity assessment and assurance reviews, but it's not licensing the individual project manager, it's an application of a methodology. So they're just a couple of examples close to home. There are several barriers, and that was part of your question. And I can run through some of those, and Campbell, please jump in at any point because you would see some of these during your experience and the way that you're managing projects. But there's what we would see as a lack of a single unified body of knowledge or standards. There are varied roles and responsibilities that cannot be consistently applied. There's a lack of statutory regulation or licensing, again at a universal level. The perception of project management being a soft skill. The fifth one, and there's a couple more, there's a rapid evolution of diverse methodologies, and we talk about hybrid and agile, and there's a various array of those approaches, again, depending on the sector, the industry, the organisation. We don't have the certification that's applied, and this again goes back to the paper in 2008, but it's relevant now. And we don't see people going from project to project or industry to industry holding similar certifications that are bestowed on them by a professional organisation. And I talk about a professional body like the APM, PMI, the Australian Institute of Project Management. Last two, there's a few. The second last one is about professional identity and career paths within the sector. We tend to see project managers zigzagging between different projects. They're project led as opposed to a parallel approach within one industry, engineering, medicine, for example. And the last one is potentially a barrier around regulation. And that comes back to project managers being able to apply their skills in different environments and framing them into one particular regulatory environment may restrict their practice. And so there's some resistance to that as well.
I think they're extremely good points, and I think it's probably symptomatic that a number of people who become project managers, regardless of how you think about what that is, have come through a very specific domain. So, the point about people who are project managers zigzagging between domains, there are plenty of examples out there of people who are a fantastic project manager at a particular type of project, a particular technical domain that they sit on top of. But then when you say uplift them into a new project, it doesn't work at all. And I think the analogy is, someone in the medical profession might be a general practitioner, a surgeon, a psychiatrist. They're all doctors, but they're all very different skill sets. And
Specialised.
yeah, and I think it's very hard in that kind of regulatory environment to say, well, a project manager is a generalist, because they seldom are. And the people that I think about when I think about really capable, decisive, pragmatic project management professionals are people who are very good in a specific domain, but I wouldn't then necessarily feel it appropriate to deploy them into a different domain.
Yes. Yeah. I've seen that happen in different roles, and some of the work that has exceptionally achieved the scope or exceeded the scope
Mm-hmm.
has been the project manager who not only has the technical skills, and whether that's their qualifications or their industry certification, but it's also their ability to harness the energy, the motivation, the drive of the team of people. So bringing those individuals together to be able to achieve an outcome. You take some of those people out, and an example was working with the defence teams and teaching project management, working with them. And one of them had been promoted into a very senior role and was a little bit out of their depth in being able to achieve certain outcomes. And they just really struggled to be able to work with a different team of people with and outside of their skill set.
Mm. Mm. Well, I think being clear about what you want the project manager to be
Mm.
is very important. In that, I think you have project managers that see themselves as being people who are news readers, they're watchers and they're reporters and they're sort of status givers, and then you have project managers who are people who see themselves as being kind of captain coach to help the team on the field to deliver to that outcome. And I think if you're making decisions about who you deploy into a specific kind of environment, being clear about the nature of the input you want from the person leading the activity is absolutely critical to understand, because someone who's a sort of a news reporter as distinct from a captain coach won't work, in my view, in a scenario when perhaps the project's in distress and those really deep interpersonal skills are necessary.
All very valid points, team, and I'm really thankful that you brought them all up. But in my mind, as I'm listening to you speak, I'm thinking about two things. As an example, you wouldn't put a civil engineer onto an IT project. It's just not the same domain, and they don't carry with them the same knowledge and understanding. But you're also touching on this concept of variability in skills. And it's really interesting because when I look at the GP model for medicine as an example, they tend to have generalist knowledge across multiple things and they are not specialists, but they're still classified as a doctor. Is that one of the issues with our industry whereby we don't see that project managers really need to be generalists across 12, 16 disciplines, not necessarily deep in any of them?
Well, I think that a project manager who is operating outside of his
Yep.
or her domain, be it in obviously the IT space or be it in engineering or whatever, they're on a hiding to nothing because they
Mm.
don't know what they don't know. And again, thinking over what really makes someone a very good project manager over and above methodology, over and above reporting frameworks, over and above any of that, is a little bit of that sixth sense of, you're telling me something's okay, but I'm looking into your eyes and I can see it is not.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's is
Yes, this is
experience.
very true. All right, we'll move on to the next one. And Campbell, this one's for you. Regulated professions like engineering and architecture in Australia have clear licensing requirements to ensure public safety. Why has the project management of industry avoided similar statutory regulations? And is that a gap that's worth addressing?
I think it's avoided it simply because it's too difficult to do, and the variation in the nature of those underlying certifications is so highly domain dependent. It would be very hard to do it at anything other than a level that would be so ephemeral. It would be difficult to apply. Um, when you sit and think about these things and then articulate a question like that and think, well, you've got a project manager running a multi-million, multi-hundreds of millions of dollars job, for them to basically have no formal qualification or no independent assessment of their skills beggars belief, because there is no other professional scenario that we would deal with in our lives where someone wouldn't be expected to have some third party, I guess, ratification of their skills and ratification of their experience. You never want to put something in the too hard basket, but it's certainly in the extremely complex basket to understand what sort of skills you would look for and then how you would actually construct some kind of pedagogical framework around and an assessment framework for um, demonstrating that somebody has those skills. So I think I've answered your question with a problem, but I think that that's it. I don't think that it's a simple thing to do unless you do it on extremely domain based scenarios. And I think the examples Chivonne was talking about before from an engineering point of view, that's kind of easy because you want a project manager who's building bridges or constructing buildings or something like that, to have a very defined, well understood series of technical skills about the physical task. But in IT and non-engineering, non-mechanical style scenarios, you've got the methodology overlay, you've got the subject matter overlay, you've got the human interaction overlay, you've got multiple combinations of those skills that would or would not be entirely appropriate in a specific environment.
Yeah, that's really hit the mark, Campbell, because when you look at those application of the technical skills, we could say almost the AI or whatever's going to come next, the next wave of innovation, can actually manage all of those tasks which have bogged down project managers for maybe centuries. If you look at how the application of those more generic interpersonal skills, and sometimes we talk about the soft skills, and I know, Daniela, you've got a question around those soft skills, how they can be applied across different disciplines and at different points in time for different project outcomes. And one that comes to mind, and this was an example with a project, and the objective of the project was to close down 3 businesses, which involved people across Asia Pacific. That project was very challenging, and technical skills can be managed, but the interpersonal skills were extraordinarily challenging because you were dealing with individuals, and the reactions to that type of project were varied, and some of those had to be managed very sensitively. And when you're talking about another overlay of culture in that scenario and how the messages are perceived, you can't teach that. It can be guided or mentored. And if I bring that back into maybe an academic space, one of the approaches that we were looking at Monash University was embedding 21st century skills across all of the curriculum that I was responsible for. And they were very different ways of measuring students' capability and how they were able to demonstrate that against a pedagogical framework. So challenging, yes. I think, Campbell, you definitely posed a question rather than an answer there, but one that we're all grappling with.
Well, to become a little bit philosophical, when you consider the cultural difference in expectation as to how people give instruction and how people receive instruction, you've got that overlay as well. Where I mean, I'm sure that the three of us and anyone who is ultimately listening to this will have had experience of working with different cultures who have very, very different expectations about how people will behave, in terms of do they expect or want to be instructed? Do they expect to be encouraged? Do they expect, what is it that they want? And
Or told what to do.
yeah,
That
absolutely.
was
And
command and control.
yep,
Yeah.
yep, and getting it wrong can have much more far-reaching and deeply personal consequences for people, other than just not getting a system in on time or a bridge built or something like that. The getting that wrong and getting that project management stuff wrong from a human interaction perspective can have the worst consequences for people, of course. And I think, not
Yes.
thinking about that and thinking about this as just a technical discipline misses a big component about what it's actually about as well.
I agree with exactly what you're saying. Moving into my next question, the UK's APM Royal Charter created the Chartered Project Professional status, a step towards recognition without mandatory licensing. So, could a similar model via Australia's Professional Standards Council work? And what would it take to gain industry support for that? And Chivonne, we might start with you.
Yeah, thank you, Daniela. I mentioned before the APM Royal Charter back in 2017, and
Mm.
that chartered project professional status that individuals can apply through various entry levels across the APM group. And the way that the Australian market's appetite might be for that type of chartered recognition comes back to one and seriously one barrier, and that's the increase in insurance premiums. And that's
Mm.
been across the board discussions that I've had over the years with various project managers and the professional associations in Australia, that once you regulate to that level of chartered status, which would have to go through the UK if we were going to do it, and I don't even believe that we can do that because being in Australia, we would have to go through our government, how they would recognise individual, and again back to individual project managers and their level of competency to have the whole of the profession recognised as a profession, the project management profession. I don't believe that there's a possibility for that to occur. And there could be that resistance, and I can talk about the resistance to regulation and how project managers and the potential increase in their insurance premiums may be that barrier. Companies may pay them,
Mm.
but on average, 80%, 70 to 80% of the project managers working on a range of projects work within an employee-employer relationship. So
Mhm.
insurance is covered by the employer, the remainder in small professional practices, and that might be an engineering practice, it might be a surveyor's practice, could be an IT
Consulting.
practice and
Yep.
consulting. Are we prepared
Mhm.
to pay for our professional liability insurance? That could cripple a lot of small businesses.
So that's really interesting because, as a contractor myself, I am personally insured for professional indemnity for the work that I do because I'm not associated with an organisation as an employee. My insurance premium is somewhere in the vicinity of $2,000 per annum. That doesn't feel like a barrier to entry for me. And further to that, I have that safeguard of knowing that I am insured should something go wrong, noting that I think the liability cap is something like $2 million. dollars. And when you really think about some of these projects, it would far exceed that in value and impact if something were to go wrong. So, is that the sticking point there, that if we were to increase the liability cap to 10, 20, $30 million dollars in line with the value of these projects, then the insurance premium would increase?
And the ongoing liability. So if you look at, and I'll use a medical example, if an obstetrician is delivering a child and their insurance premiums are upwards of over $200,000 just for the insurance, and that child before the age of 18 can demonstrate that they've had some form of injury during delivery, they can sue the individual doctor for malpractice, and then there's a series of consequences that follow on from that. One of them would be a payout, and that would require the insurance company to cover those costs for the life of that individual. Do project managers want that type of responsibility for a
Mm.
project that may or may not deliver on the expectations or the very defined scope of the project for the life of that project? And if we think about maybe some of the railway or infrastructure projects, the life of those projects can go for 100 years. And so, how do we actually build in that type of fiduciary
A
responsibility
safeguard.
and
Yeah.
legal responsibility for the life of the project? So, again,
Mm.
different sectors have different regulations around them. How do we actually manage that in the way that project managers are applying their skills across multiple sectors and at different
Mm.
levels of maturity as well?
Mm. I think it's such a valid point because I was just reading a research paper in the last couple of days on project management, but with a totally different perspective. And they were indicating that the majority of project failures actually relate to our human skills. If that is the case, and knowing that we work in teams and multiple people contribute to the culture of the project team and how cohesive and well they work together in order to achieve an outcome, it does seem a little bit rich to be able to say, "Well, I'm going to place full blame on a project manager, and
One,
you will then be responsible for the outcome of that for 10, 20, 30 years, or the life of the project, as you mentioned. So that's interesting. Campbell, do you have any thoughts on that?
Look, I do. I mean, I think you would be injecting a huge amount of additional cost for a provider. So if as a provider you had to uplift sort of the PIPL, public liability style insurance or professional indemnity style insurance, obviously massive additional cost. I think you'd get caught up in the vagaries of statements like, all I need to do is to demonstrate that I have acted with due care and skill and executed my responsibilities on that basis. And it would be very hard to make a total failure of a project stick to an individual. Equally, when people who are the people who want to take some sort of action about a project get to the point of going down that legal path, they'll join everybody to it. So I think if there was somehow through the application of a broader framework of liability or the requirement of additional insurance, you'd be painting a target on your own back to say, well, I've got cover, so come after me for that cover, which would then just load into making the cover cost more because people would be going after it, and it would degrade things rather than, I think, uplift that and discourage people greatly from wanting to be project managers. I mean, why would you want to do it? Why does anyone want to be an obstetrician? Because they're getting sued all the time,
Yes.
clearly.
But Campbell, the ultimate flow-on effect is that the fees that the project manager then charges on to the client will include those increased requirement for
Mm, mm,
insurance. And so ultimately the customer will
absolutely.
pay. And is that a fair and
Mm,
just way of actually delivering outcomes, particularly when you're working on maybe community-based projects or not-for-profit type of projects? Those organisations
mm, mm.
really can't afford more than the bare minimum.
Or people will develop contractual
Yes.
frameworks from their own perspective, much like the medical profession do, where proving that someone has made a mistake is not enough. Proving someone has acted negligently is sort of that next hurdle. But that's a very, very difficult thing to do when, at the point you're signing up to go into, have a
Surgery,
child
a
or have
waiver.
a joint
Yeah.
replacement or whatever it might be. Yeah, you say, I accept here that bad
Mhm.
things can happen and that you're trying your best. And I think that we'd kind of go to some sort of scenario that rendered some of this just silly because everyone would have said, well, I'm going to try my best, but there are things that are outside my control as a project manager, and indeed anyone's control as a project manager. So it just becomes circular and something that just made insurance
Yes.
companies a lot of money, but didn't deliver a real operational
And the legal
outcome for
profession.
anybody.
I'm using that word profession.
Yeah, indeed, indeed.
All right, so moving on to the next question. Project management's interdisciplinary nature, spanning IT, construction, business operations, complicates standardization compared to law's defined scope. So, how can we balance flexibility with consistent competencies to justify any regulation?
Can I jump in there, Daniela? If we look at that interdisciplinary nature of project management, that's probably one of its greatest strengths, but it's also a weakness. And we've talked about already how there are professions like medicine, law, accounting, where there are defined scopes where projects are managed according to very specific outcomes in those areas. If we're looking at um, other areas that might be challenged because we are looking at flexibility, and that's a dichotomy. How can you be flexible and standardize flexibility? It defines how we actually need to be able to deliver these projects because they shift and change. They're not a standard cookie cutter approach. And there are five areas that I think we need to look at if we were to go down this consistent approach to ask our project management practitioners to work towards so that they could then be considered part of a professional body. And we talked about it before, and it's also in the paper, that there has to be some sort of competency measurement that's universal. So you can apply it if you're working on a project in Sydney, Mumbai, Doha, London, all of those different areas where projects are being managed. Then we look at the accreditation that project managers are aspiring to be able to achieve within the professional associations, the representative bodies. And at the moment, the PMI has the PMP and a range of different tiers. The Australian Institute of Project Management has the same, IPMA has the same, APM has the same, but they're all tweaked to their different environments. But if we were to look at this and looking at the core competencies, you could have those technical competencies that could be consistently applied. So they're the things like the management of time, the management of quality. There are regulations around those that can be applied. But when you start to look at specialisations in different sectors, how do we then regulate consistency with flexibility and standardisation with things like using the Agile approach or Prince2 or the PIMBOK approach? So we need to think about the implications of trying to standardise within a flexible umbrella. And then the last one is looking at the licensing. So I mentioned earlier the example in Queensland to hold a license to be able to work on Queensland government construction projects. You needed to demonstrate criteria that would meet their requirements to be able to hold that license. But that's the only state or territory that has that requirement in Australia. Then we have to think about legal protection. Is it about the individual? If you're protecting a chartered project professional, then you are protected within that Royal Charter. But outside of that, around the world, I haven't found any other organisations, professional organisations or bodies that follow that. And then we need to look at the governance standards. How do you actually measure and assure quality against certain frameworks? And that again comes back to the sector, the country, and how you're going to reinforce that. And if you look at self regulation, that's currently how project managers hold their certification or membership within the professional bodies. How are they going to then take on board a universal approach for self regulating and reviewing performance if things go wrong? Like the medical board in Australia, the AMA, how do you actually then build that approach into reducing membership based on inability to apply a code of conduct or a code of ethics that you sign up to as a member of that professional body? So again, I think like Campbell, Daniela, have posed more questions than or challenges than maybe answers there. But they're thought provoking, and possibly one of the organisations, the professional bodies institutes, will take that on.
I wonder if it would be possible to look at some of those professional bodies that exist currently, um, and look for consistency of theme in their approaches. Because I'm sure that there would be, I'm not sure, I would imagine, I should say, that there would be a scenario where there are certain competencies or certain approaches that do have some I guess, kind of echoes across those different kind of bodies. The interesting thing is, of course, you then run into the political problem of an organisation, feeling that they had won or not wanting to participate, or you'd end up creating fiefdoms or classes of regulation, which of course would bring other problems to it. But I think it's extremely complex to do.
There was a mapping exercise that we did when I was on the board of the
Mm-hmm.
AIPM, and we mapped the standards of competency for certification levels by the PMI, the IPMA, and
Mm-hmm.
AIPM. And they were really close, not quite close enough at the base
Mm-hmm.
level. At the entry levels, they were very similar. It was when it got up into the more specialised areas, the more project director level, that the differences were a little bit more marked
Mm-hmm.
between the professional bodies. And you're right, Campbell, there is that friendly competition between the professional bodies because they all want to maintain their standard approach to membership competency measurement and how they can grow their businesses, which again is understandable. However, if you've got project managers, which we have, who are globally working across different sectors in different countries, if you're, and this poses another question, Daniela, rather than an answer or a solution, if you're an engineer and you are a member in Australia of Engineers Australia, you sign up to their code of conduct as you would if you're in maybe an accounting profession. If you're working on a project in London, do you sign up to the professional standards of the Engineering Association in the UK? Which one overrides the other? And then you overlay on top of that a project management membership or code of conduct that you've signed up to. Again, which one overrides the other if there's some challenges around the professionalism of the individual and whether they've delivered according to what was required of them? No answers there, sorry,
No,
just
no.
posing a few
It's
more
funny though that
questions.
as I listen to you speak and I just draw parallels with other professions who all have these exact same issues. You can be a doctor that is trained in the US, in the UK, in India. You all have different regulatory frameworks, standards, industry bodies, professional requirements. They are not the same across countries. You go and practice then medicine in another country. And yes, in some instances, I have met people that have not been able to meet the regulatory standards here in a different country, have had to go back and restudy or do some bridging knowledge work in order to do that. But when I look at the frameworks that are established for those professions, they all have very similar frameworks that touch on a lot of what you've just talked to. So, registration, regulation, ensuring compliance, consumer protections, providing guidance, webinars, training, so on and so forth, collaboration with legal and laws within every country so that, but sitting between the legislature, government, and industry. And then, of course, they provide sanctions and investigations as well where people are not performing correctly. So it's really interesting that as I listen to you and I recognize that they are all very true and accurate comments, I feel like it's surmountable.
Possibly. If you use the medical example, if you do have someone who's qualified as a doctor in another country and they come into Australia, then they do have to sit for an exam to demonstrate capability in this country. And that can take a year or two of additional study. There's a lot of money involved. And then they join the AMA or the Australian Medical Association, and they are registered here in this country to be able to practice. And also, then they're held accountable to that body. So that could possibly be an option for project managers because we don't work only in one
Correct.
country. We don't only work in one sector. How do we modify that with a base set of guidelines
Mm,
or regulations in different countries?
mm,
Who's going to monitor those? How are they going to then be instilled into the practice of project management? And then, if you reverse engineer it all the way back into the study of project management, which I have um, a little bit of a challenge with undergraduate project management qualifications because how do you contextualize the application of the skills that are being taught into real life examples, and are those students graduating? And there are some very good programs around our country here and internationally. Would I feel confident driving across a bridge that's been designed by a project manager who may have brought in skills for engineering, but they might
mm,
not be an engineer themselves? They might have come from a HR background and they've been given the task of delivering this outcome. Am I confident driving over that bridge that it's not going to collapse because there's no regulation around how that individual project manager has been able to
mm.
deliver the outcome?
Interesting.
And I think in engineering or in medicine, it's much easier to test an absolute level of knowledge and the application of that knowledge on a scenario basis than it is for a generalist project manager who has to, by the very nature that person has to be across, project type A versus project type B that might be quite disconnected from a domain perspective. And the the ability to work out how well they can actually deliver in that more amorphous environment is, I think, really complex, really complex.
I agree. Next question for you both. Australia's constitution limits national regulation, leaving professionals like engineering to state based frameworks. So, how feasible is it to harmonise, do you think, state legislation for project management? And what challenges potentially have prevented that thus far?
I think it'll take a crisis, to make it happen, because nothing drives change like a crisis. And when you look at the nationalisation of, or the national approach that's now taken to health practitioner regulation, that was driven very directly by a series of very unfortunate things that occurred with doctors practicing in different states, who shouldn't have been practicing at all, much less in different states. Something like a big sort of effectively exogenous impact on the profession or on the group of people is probably what's going to have to occur to drive something like that. And you might argue that when something like that happens, you get a bit of an overreaction, and then a bit of a rollback. So I think perhaps something like that will need to occur if indeed it should occur. Or alternatively, I don't think anything much will drive it, because people won't want to feel any more regulated, any more managed, any more legislated about than we are now, particularly here in Australia.
If I could add into that, Campbell, as well, in New South Wales and Sydney in particular, we're yet to see what the flow-on effect is going to be from a local council, North Sydney Council, and I'm looking at the data here. It was a redevelopment of their heritage-listed swimming pool. A public swimming pool was initially budgeted at $58 million. And now the overall estimate for the project is expected to be $122 million. On the news last night, they were talking about that these issues have triggered a financial crisis for the council, where they are looking at selling off assets and introducing a special rate variation. And they've increased the ratepayers' annual rates by, I think it was proposed to be 70 to 80% increase.
Ooh.
Now, when you think about the flow-on effect of a project that's gone wrong, it's not necessarily the, let's say, from a medical or a legal professional perspective that lives are at stake. Businesses are at stake potentially here, and the amenity of a council that potentially is going to spend the next 5 years or so in court fighting against the builder of the pool, who's suing the council for $28 million of overruns in costs. That's a crisis, and how could that have been managed better?
I think there are many examples of that, Chivonne, but that is a really, really good one. Regulated professions often require tertiary education like medicines, medical degrees. So, should project management mandate professional qualifications, or do voluntary certifications like AIPMs, RegPM, and PMP suffice for credibility?
Ooh. Can I jump in there,
Yeah.
Campbell? Okay. Having spent the better part of 15 odd years in the academic sector, and I call myself sometimes a recovering academic, teaching project management at a master's level and some undergraduate programs as well, I would have to say there is definitely a place for a formal qualification, a qualification being the ability to demonstrate that you have met specific technical skills against a pedagogical framework. That can be at a certificate 4 level all the way through to a PhD. It's a combination, I believe personally, that can be taught in those types of institutions, whether it's private providers, whether it's TAFE, whether it's universities, to be able to provide the foundation for practitioners to be able to then learn how to apply that in practice. And there's nothing more telling than students being able to work with a client, a live client, on projects and deliver outcomes in a live situation like a boardroom presentation that you would have in industry, for the client or the CEO to stop them and say, that's not going to work. You've not considered X, Y, and Z, because we're not going to be able to build 500 homes in that particular region because of the wet season. Have you factored in how you're going to transport all of the materials without having to fly it in helicopters? It's going to multiply the cost of the project exponentially. And the actual experience of being able to see how the learnings can be applied without stuffing it up in their jobs and potentially losing a job, losing the client, losing money for the organisation, is really valuable. So that mentorship, or almost like an internship program, which we see in other professions, being a paralegal, being an intern in a medical situation with a hospital, that can take years to learn. The certification, I believe, is also valuable because that provides recognition through a professional body of an individual. I'll keep using that word, individual. Project managers' capability to apply their lessons at different levels. And those lessons might be work-based lessons, but I'm absolutely convinced that it's a combination of both. Having employed project managers, I first of all look for their experience, and if they're new entrants, I look at their qualifications and their certifications together.
I can't add anything to that, Chivonne. That was a fantastic answer.
I've just seen the war wounds from people
Oh,
who
you.
come in with their shiny piece of paper or their badge of certification. I know how to manage a
Uh,
project. Let me at it. And it's like,
mm,
whoa, let's wait
It
just
is,
a minute.
yes, well, your experience shows through there.
yeah.
So,
I, I always though question the concept of mentoring, but then I don't know why I question it, because there is obviously empirical evidence that suggests that one-on-one learning is really, really valuable. So I think I saw a study just recently. It might have been when I was reading Carol Dweck, where she was talking about um, there is a correlation between people that end up becoming the most intelligent people in their field and the one-to-one learning that they received as children. So I recognize that there is need for it, but I wonder, I see and meet a lot of organizations where the people we are receiving guidance from are not necessarily trained in our field. And this is always a really difficult
Mm.
quandary to be in, because there is a perception that my one-up manager is the person that provides me with feedback and guidance on my career and my performance and so forth. But if that person doesn't actually have any project management experience and has never been educated in our field, how valuable is that to my development? And so I find, I suppose it's not the theory of what we're stating, it is more the application in business that I question whether we're doing the right things.
Daniela, I've got a great example. Sorry, Campbell, I'm jumping
that's
in
all right.
here, but there's an organisation, they do an exceptional job at this. They are a construction engineering project management consultancy that's been going for probably nearly 60 years now. They work on some fairly major infrastructure projects around the country and internationally. And they have exiting project directors or leaders or partners of the organisation retained on what they call their alumni program. And what happens is, as this learned body of people are moving from the organisation, they are recruited back into the organisation and paid to be able to work with the newer entrants, or the people who are maybe just taking on one of the larger projects and haven't had that experience yet, to work side by side with them. It's a cost to the company and potentially to the project, but it's an investment in the learning on the job for their body of project managers who are qualified and certified at different levels, both in project management and in their discipline, their sort of foundational discipline. And it does work exceptionally well because the people who are exiting want to stay within the organisation, but not the sort of 50 to 80-hour weeks with the absolute focus on timelines, and happy to helicopter in, helicopter out, go on 3 months leave, come back and work within that organisation.
There is a research paper in that, Chivonne.
Oh,
Absolutely, to be able to measure how much more successful are your project managers versus project managers in organizations that do not have alumni provide guidance and targeted mentorship to project managers delivering projects under the corporate banner. I think it would be a wonderful research paper because
yeah.
I think that it would be proven to be a highly successful strategy. What do you
Oh,
think, Campbell?
absolutely. I mean, there's and nothing beats the benefit of experience. And I think again, to make a slightly philosophical comment, in this world of AI, where you can get knowledge, and you can get the application of that knowledge very easily, it undervalues fundamentally the been there, done that, years of experience type stuff, where some of those the very, very subtle clues and the very subtle issues that might be occurring within the life of a project of any type, are missed by the undergraduate qualified project manager who has just come on out of uni with their special badge and are giving it a go. And I'm not being negative about young people. I mean, we were all young people once, right? And starting, but I think the benefit of people who can really authentically talk about challenges that are often very much more about the experiential, behavioural, motivational type issues that are dealt with on projects rather than the technical task orientations. There's a huge amount of value there.
Your research notes the ad hoc professionalism of project managers. So, is there an appetite among Australian practitioners and organisations to pursue regulation, or does resistance to added costs and bureaucracy prevail?
Oh, thanks, Daniela. I think, as we've talked about so far, that there's a varied appetite for Australian project managers to be part of a regulated profession. If they wanted to be part of a regulated profession, the positives or the advantages could be increased credibility, could be the reduction of risk if they're protected by enhanced insurances and a body that is going to be consistently applied to people who are doing both the right and maybe not so right things in their practice. There could be more government or public sector support around regulation because of what I just mentioned with the budget blowout for the North Sydney pool, and the ability for project managers to apply their recognised professional standing globally. And we mentioned how project managers are often working on multiple projects across different borders. The challenges that we've also mentioned a little bit in bringing it into sort of some sort of summary are the potential for increased cost because of the bureaucracy, and you mentioned some litigation examples, and so there's that risk. Are there existing frameworks that might be outdated? So if you've got an AIPM, RegPM certification, do you need to recertify to a global body that sits over and above AIPM, APM, the PMI, IPMA, all of those different organisations? The challenge around the diverse skill sets and industries where project managers are practicing in. And there's a lovely quote about, is it fit for purpose, or how are we actually adjusting that flexibility? And then, are the clients, whether they're employees, employers, or other types of organisations, setting their own standards? So I mentioned the example of the Queensland government. They've set their own framework in place and they will measure the outcomes based on that framework. So at the moment, we don't have any current formal process to regulate the sector. So going back to 2008, coming forward 17 years, nothing's really changed there. There are the regulations that are applied through signing up to be a member of one of the professional associations like IPMA, PMI, AIPM, APM. But we need to review this. And you mentioned maybe there's a way of actually bringing papers, some more research papers into the discussion. If they're grounded in what's actually happening, that would be a fantastic way to move this discussion forward.
Mm, I would agree. I think it needs a little bit more deep analysis and thought and consideration. Um, Globally, though, project management relies on those professional bodies, as we've talked about several times today, IPMA, PMI, rather than regulatory regulation. So, why hasn't there been a stronger worldwide push for regulation? And could Australia lead that effort, given that its active industry bodies like IPMA Australia and AIPM are they're there to be able to fill that gap should we feel that we need it. Does that make sense?
It does. Daniela, there's so many things that could come out of this point where you have the major associations, and there's a wonderful history of how they've actually formed in different countries. So the AIPM was formed back in the early 70s from discussions of some leading project managers, mainly working within large infrastructure projects, and the establishment of AIPM happened around the same time as PMI and IPMA. There's some brilliant coverage of that in the Project Manager Journal within the AIPM and the history of project management. So Alan Stretton, who was one of the early founders of the AIPM, has written some beautiful work there. So you can trace back the history, so we have a body of knowledge there. However, when you're working across different jurisdictions, each of those professional associations will be representing their countries and their members. If you ask them to provide some sort of universal coverage for members in different countries, so if you're saying a body that resides in maybe Switzerland is going to be able to regulate the work that's been done by a project manager delivering a hydro project in Tasmania, is that going to provide the coverage and the protection that would be an advantage of being a member of a professional association that regulates globally how project managers are going to conduct their work? That can be quite challenging. Can we lead it in Australia? We can do anything in Australia. I have that strong belief. However, again, you do have different levels of interest across different professional bodies. We have very active chapters of the PMI in all of our states and territories, the same with the AIPM and IPMA Australia. You've got the APFPM, which is across Asia Pacific, the Asia Pacific Federation of Project Management that was established by the AIPM. You've got a whole lot of bodies that are all working in this space, and to bring them all together would be utopia if we could do that. AIPM and PMI started those discussions back in probably around 2011, I'd say 11, 10, 11. And then it filtered away. So like with any of these types of approaches, there's going to be friendly competition, I would call it, to be able to lift the standards within this sector. I'm not sure that you're going to achieve consistency across all of those representative bodies. And they're just the few that I've mentioned. And there are bodies in India, there are bodies in China, there are bodies in all countries around the world. How do we bring them together?
What you said earlier actually gave me hope. You said something around when you were involved in the professional certification committee, I dare say, for AIPM, and you did the assessment and analysis across PMI, I think it was, and AIPM certification, and found that at the base level, they were very similar, and maybe they were more targeted or a little different as they became more senior, but it is comforting to know that at the base level, our requirements across the US, Australia, and potentially Europe are more aligned than not? And is that a good starting ground from which we can leverage?
There is, and there's a number of different applications too, Daniela, when you start to look at, as you said, leveraging the application across different professional bodies. There's a Global Alliance for the Project Professions, GAPS. They look at benchmarking and aligning standards that are transportable across different sectors. There's also, if you look at in Australia, the ICCPM, and they are also looking at complexity and standards around complexity in project management. So those groups have been going for a number of years, and we can look at those standards which can be applied, and there are bodies of knowledge around those. Yet they're also part of this overarching group of different types of professional associations that members join depending on their level of interest and
Yes.
how they're positioned within the organisations that are mandating different types of frameworks that are espoused by those associations. So, if
Mm,
you've got a Prince 2 methodology which is being applied on certain projects, then you will start to look at people getting certified in that methodology. If you've got the PMBOK as the preferred methodology or Agile, you're going to require your project managers to be certified or recognised in that particular framework. How you can then apply it globally, we could potentially go and look at the gaps and look at ICCPM and say, can that be universally applied? And how
mm,
would the other professional associations bring their different standards of competency to align to those other standards that are mentioned
mm,
within those other frameworks?
mm. Ooh, you're giving me hope, Chivonne. Okay, moving on to our next question. Regulation could enhance accountability in high risk sectors like infrastructure and IT, but they may increase costs, as we've talked about a little earlier. So, who benefits most from professionalising project management? Is it the practitioners, the clients, the public? And are the trade offs worthwhile?
Oh, that's another tough question. If we start to look at the flow on effect, where it actually ends up, and that's the cost of the project. Who pays for the project? If it's a government funded project, obviously it's the taxpayer. And what say do they have to be able to influence the budget and how it's being allocated to different projects? So if we're increasing regulation, we're increasing the cost of the project, the ultimate flow on effect is to the end user because they will end up paying for whatever that regulation is going to deliver. And yes, if you're a project management practitioner who's working for different organisations, your fees will go up and it will become
Yeah.
a competitive playing field where it could potentially be a race to the bottom where people undercut each other.
Mm,
And then who's going to end up paying for any of the overruns that may not have been included in the budget to keep the costs down for the client to approve it? And then you end up in court for years trying to claim back some of those out of pocket, unallocated costs that were kept out of the budget to win the project. It's a bit of a circular
mm.
argument.
It is. It is. It's an interesting one. And my last question for today, when you look at project failures, my personal belief is that a lot of what fails is actually hidden to us
Mm.
for one reason or another, whether it be through contractual arrangements, whether it be through just access to information, so on and so forth. So, could public failures drive this demand for regulation? And how can we proactively build a case for professionalisation without waiting for a crisis to occur?
The burning platform and how we're seeing all of that. And that's often what hits the news, this project overrun. Um, Unfortunately, if there are deaths on site for different projects, they hit the
Mm,
press. The good projects, we do recognise them, but only within the walls of our professional bodies with the award ceremonies that we have that recognise best practice. If we're looking at this professionalisation of the practice of project management, are we able to look at the cases that are excelling and saying, this is best practice in this sector with this type of level of competency at a project manager individual level? Are we able to look at that and apply some of those lessons to other projects to increase and build that case to be able to deliver exceptional outcomes? Because at the end of the day, no project manager that I know goes onto a project voluntarily or by being drawn onto a project to fail.
No,
And it's often the
true.
case of the information that's being withheld, where the challenges that are potentially insurmountable at the time, where they've uncovered contaminated soil, which is going to require remediation, or in the case of some of the projects that I'm working on, where you're finding Indigenous artefacts and the project has to stop to bring archaeologists in to work on that particular location. That will all potentially increase the cost of the project. But if there's a clear and transparent, trusting relationship between the project manager, the team, or the organisation that they work for with the client that's requiring that work to be achieved, whether it's an employee-employer relationship or whether it's consultant-client relationship, with large infrastructure, large defence projects, any type of project, it's calling out what potentially can go wrong early so you can
Mm.
address it, and you have those relationships that have been established to be able to ensure that if things aren't working, you have the confidence to go to the person who's going to need to approve any increases in resources, whether it's people, time, could be money, to be able to deliver the outcome, is able to understand where you're coming from. Those
Mm.
barriers can be broken down fairly easily. We do it often with relationship building in all types of different sectors. Why don't we do it more in project management? It's like get in there,
Yeah,
get it
yeah.
done, deliver it, and then sometimes turn around and say, oh, dear, okay, we delivered this brilliant solar farm. Did anybody think to look at the load on the transmission lines and whether they were going to cope, having been in Spain when the whole country blacked out? No, sometimes those connections
Yes.
are not made.
Yes, yes. Well, sometimes it's not within the remit or the scope of the project, right? We tend to take a very siloed view without understanding that we now live in a highly connected world where everything has a relationship to multiple things that precede it and multiple things that will, be impacted by it. And yeah, the unfortunate truth of project management is I want you to build this thing with really little consideration of other elements from the outset
The inputs and the
sometimes.
outputs. Yes. Yeah.
Correct, correct. Anyway, it's been a thoroughly enjoyable conversation, Chivonne. As I was sitting here listening to you, I was thinking I could just ask Chivonne questions all day long. And I thought, if you ever run a research project again, I would love to come and help you. It would be
Brilliant.
right up my alley. But
Fantastic.
one
Yeah.
one final question for you, which is just this final question around as project leaders in this vast and glorious industry that we work in, are you still learning,
100%
Campbell?
every day, every single day. And I think the more experience I get in my life, not just in my working life, the more I know how little I know, and the more I value the skills and experiences and wisdom I can see in other people.
Siobhan, are you still learning?
Absolutely. Every single day. And it's one of those beautiful disciplines that allows you the flexibility to apply it in any context. And that's the attraction from very early on in my career, being managing projects in the arts and design field across to marketing, financial services, into teaching and health management, and now working across different sectors in the renewable energy groups. So I absolutely love learning. One of the quotes that I love to live by, and it's on my fridge at home, and it's by Michelangelo, and it says, "I am still learning." And the other one was when I visited a beautiful research colleague friend who works up in Boston and Maine in the US. And we went to see the Alcott family home from Little Women. And there's a beautiful quote there that says, "Teach by encouragement." So
Oh,
that's what I live by. I pass as many lessons on that I can, share whatever I can, and hope that they land somewhere, and then you'll be able to ensure that people coming in after us are able to deliver those outcomes that we've laid the foundations for.
absolutely. People receive information when they're ready to receive it. So I guarantee you that at some point, whether it's today or at a point in the future, people will listen to this and think, I really needed to hear that message today. So very thankful to you, Chivonne, and for your life's work
Thank
in
you.
project management. It is really such an amazing career that you have led, from being on the tools to then choosing to teach, which is not easy, and it mustn't have been an easy transition for you professionally.
Mm.
And doing all the research that you've done, so many research papers that have been cited, all around the world. It's very impressive, your career. You should feel very proud.
Thank you, Daniela. I never really look at it that way, but it's about just doing the best you can with what you've
On
got
the
at
craft.
that time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's all I live by.
Good on you. So, some key takeaways from today's panel discussion. Essentially, the project management industry lacks a regulatory framework, and it lacks that standardization, which we've talked about many times today, like those that we can see in the tax industry with the TPB and ASIC, due to several factors. So, the lack of that centralized regulator, the constitutional barriers in Australia specifically, but then there are also country to country barriers as well. We have different industry bodies located in different countries, and really, how do we bring all of those parties on board to a centralized framework of how we measure and standardize? There's that lack of fiduciary responsibility, the interdisciplinary nature of project management, our perceptions that voluntary certifications will suffice, and possibly that industry resistance and the lack of a global precedent. Anything else to add or that you'd subtract there?
I would like to add in there, I think, Daniela, it also comes back to the individual and their appetite for growth and their mindset for achieving a collective outcome. And the old acronym, there's no I in team, and
Hmm.
we're all working towards the same goal, whether you're on
Mm.
opposing sides of the fence and delivering outcomes that might be challenging for people. It's a collective outcome. There's no single person until there's something that goes wrong, but it's ideally a collective approach.
So, will it change, Siobhan? My final question to you. What do you think?
I think a lot of it will depend on the capability of the individual project managers and their appetite for how to blend technology, because we're seeing a lot of shifting at the moment and it's changing so rapidly, and the interpersonal skills. So that intersection of machine and person, and how to actually look at somebody that you're presenting an outcome to that may not be favorable, and how to
Mm.
deal with that, how to manage that. And again, it comes back to expectations, it comes back to understanding stakeholders and applying your ability to manage those interpersonal skills. We can't defer some of those tough conversations to a bot. Maybe one day we will, but
Mm.
at the moment, I think that future will definitely rely on the individual skills, characteristics to come to the fore, as well as being underpinned or embedded with foundational technical skills, and that now increasingly is technologically based.
Mm. Very good points. All right. Well, that has been an absolutely amazing conversation. Thank you so much to Siobhan and Campbell for joining me today on our podcast. I've gained some really valuable insights from this session. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniela, and thank you, Campbell.
And thank you to all of our faithful listeners for tuning into this episode of Powering Projects. If you found today's episode valuable, please do subscribe, share it with your community of project professionals, and leave me a review. Your engagement helps me reach more people just like you who benefit from this community. But don't stop there. Engage with us, share your thoughts, let me know which skills, techniques, and topics you'd like me to cover, and help me discover the voices and stories that will benefit our entire community. If you have a guest suggestion, comment below or email me at poweringprojects@gmail.com. And until next time, keep powering your projects from vision to victory. And let's shape a future where project management stands tall as a profession, delivering impact with accountability and pride. This is DK, Chivonne, and Campbell signing out. The content provided in this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and does not constitute professional, legal, or financial advice. The opinions expressed by the host and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of any affiliated organisations or sponsors. While we strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information on project management methodologies and related topics, no guarantee is made regarding the completeness, accuracy, or applicability of the content to your specific circumstances. Listeners are encouraged to consult with qualified professionals before making decisions based on the information shared in this podcast. The hosts, guests, and producers are not liable for any losses, damages, or outcomes resulting from the use of this podcast's content. By listening to this podcast, you agree to assume all risks associated with the application of the information provided. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope you'll find value in our discussions.